Hello, everyone. On behalf of Consumers International, I'm delighted to welcome the audience and panelists to our amazing session, Making Sustainability More Human. This session is part of our Sustainable Lifestyle Summit held to mark World Consumer Rights Day. Consumers International and its members all over the world are focused on the top issues for consumers and fight for a fair, safe, and sustainable marketplace for all. The Consumers International Program on Sustainable Lifestyles engages our members and partners in campaigns, research, recommendations, and meaningful innovation for consumers. One anecdote that I want to start off this session with is that a couple of years ago, there was a research that was conducted across 34 countries where consumers were asked, what does sustainability mean to them? And there were multiple different ways in which consumers explained or connected or associated with sustainability. So we wanted to dig in a little bit more. And on today's session, we've brought in Accenture Song to partner us to explain how do we make sustainability more human. Before we kick off the session, I want to start off by some housekeeping rules. Translation or closed captions. If you require translated captions, please activate the captions button at the bottom of your screen. You can set your speaking language as well as the caption language, the language of your choice. And we will request all the speakers, whenever you're speaking, speak clearly and slowly for the audience. Ground rules. Please note that this session will be recorded. Attendees must adhere to our event code of conduct, and we would love for you to share your thoughts. And so we have enabled Slido technology throughout. Please have your phone to hand to scan the Slido and respond. So we have a Q&A where you could scan the barcode and you can send in your questions for the panelists to respond to going forward. So I request everyone to have your phones at hand and quickly scan the below QR code where you can send in your questions to the panelists, and we will ensure that by the end of the session, your questions are being answered. At this note, I want to bring in the moderator for today's session. That's Mark Curtis from Accenture Song. Mark is the global head of sustainability and thought leadership for Accenture Song. He leads the creation of Accenture's famous annual report, Life Trends, and is a thought leader around the intersection of human and technology, and has published a book, Distraction, Being Human in the Digital Age. So a lot of things, a lot of hats that Mark has worn. I want to hand over the baton to Mark from here.
Thank you, Ayushi, and thank you so much, for doing this at all, the focus you've got on this, but also for inviting all of us to talk today. So I'm going to be joined later on by Ollie Pattenden, who works with me at Accenture Song. I'm going to be joined by Ali Moore from ReLondon. I'm going to be joined by Ludvig Liljekvist from Ingka, IKEA. So people with wonderfully different perspectives on consumers and sustainability. I'm going to let them introduce themselves a little bit more when they appear. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to show a couple of videos. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I think it sets the scene and sets some context. Let me tell you a little bit about this. Whenever COP26 was, I forget when now, but a while ago, we began some research, which Ollie is going to go into in much more detail with you. And the first wave of that research was in honor of where COP26 was, which was Glasgow, to look at how people who actually live and work in Glasgow feel about sustainability and their relationship with sustainability. So ordinary consumers, I mean ordinary in the best possible way. And I'm going to show you two films on that, very short. The first one starts here, and you are going to hear some context for people's lives as they begin to relate to sustainability. So very important scene setting for us. Over to them to speak for themselves.
Quite like a small industry in Glasgow. Everyone sort of knows everyone, so it's quite easy to get a job in coffee once you've got one. I think we were just at the pub one night, and then we just saw each other about all the time and became pals. and then ended up being colleagues.
Yeah, it's just Glasgow. It's the drinking man's Las Vegas. Everybody just meets in the pub. We get a big mix because we're quite vegan friendly. Majority of the people that come in are vegan. They are conscious of the environment. I mean, we just had like one of the best summers we've ever had. And if that's not climate change, I don't know what it is. It's like sunny for like 2 months.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen.
What kind of monkey? Big Marty. Like it?
Mind me asking what year you were born?
For me?
Yeah.
1941. The day they struck the Bismarck. 29th to the 5th, 41.
On it sometimes.
Jimmy, what's your hopes for the future?
Yeah, he's fish supper on Sunday.
And what do you want for dinner? Do you want in my household there is a youth which is 5 months old. I've got a 5-year-old and my husband. There is not enough time in the day to get things done. It's hard, especially with 2 kids. You feel like you're constantly chasing your tail. You tend to kind of like bypass things quite a lot.
He's a Havanese, which is the national dog of Cuba. I looked at a Bolognese as well, which is from Bologna, but they were just really, they were that size. I mean, I'm bad enough being this size, taking him out for a walk. Yeah, so in July, I had a bit of a health scare. I took a heart attack in the living room after letting the dog out, giving him his breakfast, and it was all right to all wrong. It was as quick as that. You could have clicked your fingers. I'm the kind of guy you would find quickly checking emails when on the holiday, that type of thing. That whole side of things to me is now stopped.
I just graduated uni this May, and then since then I've been working in hospitality ever since. Most of my money goes on rent, and then food, and then probably going out. You know, maybe I spend money on clothes. I buy like loads of like stuff like online, second hand. Probably wear a lot of clothes as well.
I left school with no real kind of intention of doing anything, and it was my dad's past that encouraged me to want to work on cars. Emily, my oldest daughter, was born. I was 19 years old, so still very young myself, very naive. And Sophia came along 2 years later when I was 21. This year's been tough for everyone, coming out of lockdown and stuff like that. I've also had my own hurdles along the way. The passing of my dad earlier on throughout the year, do you know what I mean? So I would say my plate is pretty full, you know, because obviously I've got work commitments, I've got my new house, I've got my 2 children, I've got a child on the way, you know. When people are shocked to see that you're a parent at that age, as they're brilliant wee girls though, they keep you going, and I couldn't ask for better children.
So I always think it's really good to just immerse ourselves a little bit in people's lives and understand and give a sense of where they're coming from. Where we really now begin to focus on today's agenda is where we got those people to talk about how they feel about sustainability. And it begins to become very revealing.
People will say I'm daft for cars. It's all I've kind of really known and had an interest in. I've had this car for 5 or 6 years. It's more of a kind of labour of love. It's a donkey. It will just keep going. You put diesel in it and it runs. My car, which obviously doesn't meet up to date Euro emission standards, but I can't really afford an electric car. I couldn't work in Govan, which is 11 miles from here, and then have to rely on public transport or cycle, you know, when the weather's the way it is in Scotland. My children are the hardest thing because they are so fussy. They like chicken nuggets, they like mince and potatoes, do you know what I mean? So to then come home and try and cook 4 meals for 4 different pallets is not sustainable when you're burning all the gas and you're got all the lights lit, you know.
I think like we can all take like a bit of personal responsibility for it, but there's only so much that me recycling is going to do. You know, I'm vegetarian, trying to make steps towards vegan, because like dairy and meat agriculture is one of the biggest polluters, but that's like personal things that I'm able to do that. Not everyone in the world is able to do that.
No answer. The word sustainability didn't really mean much to me, I would say, until quite recently. I remember kind of watching the David Attenborough Planet series on Netflix, and I think that's when it really kind of started to hit home. I think when your child points it out to you, you do think about it a lot more. And then when he comes home and he knows more than you definitely want to Google that and find out what's happening. My shopping habits, due to COVID and things like that, have changed so much. And I've just become used to getting things online now, and they just get delivered, and it's just so much more easier.
I'd love to at some point go vegan. I'm not right now.
Well, I eat meat, so I'm a terrible example.
Yeah.
It's just so tasty. It's almost like they try and like price people out of the market. So it's like to make yourself feel good, you're like, oh, I'll get a wee vegan thing.
Is will I go from cutting out meat and going to some other maybe plant derivative or a vegetarian derivative? I don't really see that happening.
You're filthy.
Certain things you just don't want to get away from. There's nothing better than having a steak on a Thursday night. I suppose you've got to put the right kind of fuel in, and if anything from what we've discussed and what's happened to me in the last few months, that's important. You walk into Aldi or Morrison's or wherever you might be, and you go to that bit in the fridge where it says, here's your steaks. You don't have the plant-based derivative or the vegetarian derivative next to it, because they're off in another section I would tend to probably not look at. You maybe look at things and try to buy loose stuff, but then 2 hours later you're on ordering stuff online, and then it comes like just covered in packaging. You've then been driven by convenience, and the whole bit of doing your bit for save the planet is went out the window.
So hopefully you heard a lot of what I heard in that. In fact, I found myself making notes, watching them again. You know, what they talked about the difficulties of how to get around, you know, the young guy with the car and the fact that cars are deeply in his DNA from his dad. What to eat came up a lot. Lack of empowerment to be able to change things. The meaning of sustainability itself, and actually lack of proximity to the word. Convenience, that came up a lot. Desire, that quote, it's so tasty. You know, just straightforward. Appeal to what people care about. And lastly, a thought that consumers have solutions if you listen to them. So with that, I'm going to ask Ollie to join us. Ollie Pattenden, if you can join, thank you. And Ollie is, first of all, he's going to introduce himself, and then I want him to take, I think it's 10 minutes or so, Ollie, to drive us through the very deep research that we've done, which really gives now a lot of granular detail on some of the messages we began to hear in those videos. Ollie, great to see you. Over to you.
Lovely to see you too, Mark, and thank you to Consumers International for having me and all of us this afternoon. As Mark says, I'm going to talk through some research. Just a tiny introduction to let you all know that my background is in anthropology, so you'll hear me a lot on this call talking about people, talking about culture, talking about behaviour. And within Accenture Song, I work with Mark as a research director, really trying to find ways that we can connect with people differently through marketing, advertising, and product design and development as well. I'm going to talk, as Mark says, for approximately 10 minutes today about a project which we've been working on for probably nearly 3 years now, called Our Human Moment. And it began at the same time that we were thinking about COP26. So hopefully you can all see the screen with me presenting. And our human moment really starts from the premise of this conversation today, which is that sustainability in and of itself is incredibly systemic. Yes, we need to be talking about policy change. Yes, we need to be talking about regulation, networks, technology, supply chains, etc. This kind of infrastructure is absolutely integral and essential. However, at the heart of all of this systemic change is people. It's people who will determine what solutions are or aren't created. And ultimately, it's people within organizations and outside of organizations, whether or not that's citizens or consumers, who will determine the success of these systemic changes, which is why we're very much focused on the human story. As we saw and as we heard in the films that Mark presented, when you frame sustainability in a wide way, which we did in this question, we didn't ask people specifically about the S word. We asked them, are you keen to live in a way that's beneficial for people and the planet? And the majority of people say, yes, I am, 96%. So the positive story to begin with is that 4% of the world's population are people we need to worry about because they genuinely don't care about other people and they don't care about the planet. But the majority of people do. However, when you ask them, what is it that organizations are doing to help you, to engage with you, the majority say not very much at all. In fact, 25% alone say they're encouraged by businesses of large or small size to take sustainable action. And even fewer, 19%, are inspired by brand messaging and advertising. And it pales in comparison to the biggest, most dominating force, which is friends and family. And we've really been looking at that over the last 2 years, asking a very simple question. Why is that? Why is that the case that organizations are not doing more collectively to inspire, to encourage and engage with people? To ask that question, we've been executing across a number of different methodologies. So you'll see evidence on today's presentation of a quantitative survey across 11 markets, 8,000 respondents. But you'll also see evidence of some semiotics and some ethnographic research as well in all of the countries that you can see listed. The purpose of that research is really get behind the surface level understanding that the numbers can give us and really ask deep and meaningful questions about people's lives and how they're living them today. The macro finding of the research is what we call the relevancy gap. So you see this huge distinction between the left-hand side, which tends to be the way that sustainability is talked about by organizations, governments, and companies. And here, sustainability on the left-hand side feels very intangible. It feels very utopian. You have this miraculous image of people growing plants from their hands or growing light bulbs from their hands. Everything looks shiny, everything looks wonderful. And if you compare that to some of the stories that you heard in the films that Mark just shared, or some of the examples, the ethnographic examples that we heard in our research, they feel very much at odds with each other. People's lives are very much more rooted in the everyday. They're very, very rooted in these beliefs, practices, behaviors, habits, and rituals. And for many people, the corporate, commercial, and governmental narrative around net zero, decarbonisation can feel very distant, very alien. And that's what we call the relevancy gap. In order to address it, we have a number of principles. I'll just share three of them with you in terms of how we might address it. One is actually about language and framing. So how do we think about sustainability as a word that can actually alienate a lot of people? It's become highly politicized, certainly in the last 12 to 18 months. And we saw in our research that when you talk about sustainability as the S word, you actually lose a significant portion of your audience, 15% in the case of our research. So how do we focus on something other than the S word? The second one is about broadening the scope or broadening the lens of what we talk about. If you isolate sustainability to conversations about planetary concerns, environmental concerns only, you really miss an opportunity to connect with what matters to people, which is stories about people they care for, people that they love, grandparents, parents, children, co-workers. It's those types of stories about humans, our collective well-being, combined with a conversation about planetary and climate conversations that really, really resonate with people much better. And then third and finally, going beyond the conversation about affordability. This one might be a little bit contentious because affordability and price when it comes to sustainability is incredibly prevalent and we do need to pay attention to it. So you heard on the film, for example, the perception and the reality that some vegetarian or plant-based alternatives within supermarkets can be more expensive. And we know, for example, conversations about EVs, particularly in Europe, have been in this space. So it's not to say that affordability and price don't matter. It's just why and how they matter to people goes beyond financial concerns. What we found is that actually the number one variable between those who engage with sustainability and those who don't actually connects with topics such as identity and well-being. So do people think sustainability connects with who they are and the type of person that they want to be? So if you take those three principles together, it really gets you to a fundamental shift, which is what we'll be talking about for the rest of this afternoon's conversation. The shift from how can we stop making humans more sustainable? That as a question tends to be what's posed most often. It gets you into the place of how do you push, how do you encourage, how do you educate, and how do you nudge people into a very different space, which is actually how can you make sustainability more human? That means focusing on this thing called sustainability and transforming it, changing the way we speak about it, and ultimately changing for how we design for it, whether or not that's in government, NGOs, or within companies. And we have two frameworks to help us make sustainability more human. The first is this idea of the six entryways to sustainability. So you can think about these as jumping off points or ways of thinking about sustainability in six different ways. Just as two examples, you can think about sustainability as a way of caring for people, caring for places, and caring to objects. And if you talk about sustainability as a mode of care, as a way of enacting care, delivering care, it feels much more inclusive, much more human, much more approachable. And similarly, on the bottom right-hand side, openness. Sustainability is an opportunity for people to discover things, experiment things, try new things. That can feel far more welcoming and far more approachable than many of the other framings. So we use these six entryways for really broadening our definition, but probably most importantly, changing the way we can connect with people when it comes to sustainability. And the second framework is really one that's more specifically oriented to targeting audiences and understanding audiences. So these can be consumer, customer audiences or citizenship engagement related audiences as well. What we found in our research, which is really a crucial piece of the puzzle, is what distinguishes people who take action from people who don't take action. So on the left-hand side in the gray, you can see people who aren't taking action. That's people who say they're not taking action towards sustainability. And on the right-hand side, people who say they are taking action. And you can see they're absolutely opposite when it comes to what we call worldviews. So if you take the worldview, which is agency at the top, and an example of the worldview around agency, which is the idea that your decisions can change the world, people who aren't taking action don't think their decisions can change the world. People who are taking action fundamentally do think their decisions can change the world. And that opposition was true of all of our worldviews: agency, outlook, disposition, and then also responsibility. So what we found is these worldviews really separate the action takers from the non-action takers far more fundamentally than other demographic variables such as age or income or gender or education level. Really, really more powerful distinguishing features. And we took the idea of those worldviews and baked it into our second framework, which is the idea of life-centric archetypes. And what you can see on these six kind of yin and yang type illustrations is the left-hand side of each is a worldview, and the right-hand side is a relationship to sustainability. And the numbers show you the portion of the global sample that represent each of the archetypes. So if you take the yellow one, uncertain skepticism, 21% of the world's population that we surveyed fall into this archetype, and they think the future is incredibly uncertain and difficult to control, and they're very skeptical to jump in. Whereas determined pragmatism on the bottom left, very, very different. They think hope is necessary and we need to find it, and they feel like they're living the sustainability crisis on multiple fronts. And self-interested idealism in the purple, for example, very different again. They're quite optimistic. They think the future's going to be okay. They think everything's going to be all right, but they're very, very focused on the self, particularly in terms of health and well-being. And what you can use these archetypes for as just one illustration is different ways of approaching different audiences, different groups of people when it comes to sustainability. So determined pragmatism, for example, because they are very much engaged in the climate crisis and they've experienced it, You can speak to those direct experiences. You can talk about how they can address the personal and planetary challenges in their everyday life and offer them very tangible solutions. So you could talk about how a sustainable vehicle makes fundamental environmental, financial, and practical sense, for example. Whereas the self-interested idealism one I spoke to, much more focused on the self, much more focused on what it means for them individually. They want to feel good about themselves. So how can you talk about a sustainable vehicle in that way as a mode and a means to make them feel good about themselves? And that can translate into messaging, it can translate into organizational change, and it can also change into the way we design interventions, programs, materials, products, etc. And that's it. So that's the idea of the relevancy gap, the idea of making sustainability more human, the entryways, and also the idea of the archetypes. And with that, I believe and hope we're collectively going to go into a discussion with friend Mark.
Thank you, Ollie. Beautifully done on timing as well. So much in there, which I'm not going to recap. Ali, yes, Ludvig, can you join us as well on video? That's great. Thank you. So I'm going to go straight into the conversation because we've got half an hour for it and lots to talk about, no doubt. Ali, would you like to go first and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, I'm Ali. I work for an organisation called ReLondon. We're a statutory body, for those of you who don't know about us. We're part of the London Local Government Infrastructure, a partnership of the Mayor and London's boroughs. And we are here to help London reduce waste, increase its recycling, and become a low carbon circular city. And I personally look after all of our communications and behaviour change work here.
Brilliant. Ludvig, over to you.
Thank you, Mark and Ollie. My name is Ludvig Liljekvist. I work at Ingka Group, which is the largest IKEA retailer, with something called Action Speaks. It's an open platform for climate solutions, but also been working over the last decade or so almost with our sustainability insights, but also the future studies connected to that. So very happy to be here. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to bring us back to it's tempting to dive straight in and talk about what Ollie just talked about, but I think we just put that on hold for a moment. We should talk a little bit about what I in my head call the meta questions, and the big one is, why do you think, Ludvig, as you're on screen, I'm going to ask you now, why do you think the world is not moving fast enough to tackle climate change and other related issues like loss of biodiversity? Or maybe you're going to say we are moving fast enough.
It's a very good question, Mark, and I think no, I believe we're not moving quick enough, at least not at scale. Some are moving fast, but not many, not in this pace we need at this moment. So I think I think Ollie, you got into it a bit. We're stuck in a doom and gloom story. Neither the systems and stories, the systems and stores are actually doing exactly what we designed them to do. But we need to maybe rethink how we tell the stories for the many people and ourselves. What systems will create in the end something better and not something worse? So that's why I think how we can do that is really to accelerate things. We need to focus on action. So we need to see what are the actions that we can take today. Because people know that the world is changing. They feel more and more of the climate change agenda. They know why it's happening, why we're increasing greenhouse. But now it's really to focus and really coming together on the action point to bring hope and optimism. And I think action would be the way that we can accelerate that at scale, at least.
Okay, thank you. I thought I heard two things in there. And I'm just going to ask, do you think both equally important? One, you said we've got to rethink how we tell stories for the many. And then the other is we actually need action. And I think you're saying both. Is that correct?
Yes. And I think they're part of the same coin for me. I see action as taking both as corporate government, but also the many people. We need all to take action. But we also need to take action is also what we've seen through our work, that it really demonstrates a positive behavior, both on individual behavior, but also in the community on a business-to-business environment. So we can both see that the more action, and I think Ollie was onto this in his research as well, that really people, when they start taking action and seeing the effect of those, if they know what really creates impact, then they will continue to walk down that path. And then the question is, how do we get more people to kind of step into that? And then we get into the barriers and motivators, which there are several, but some key ones, I think.
Good, thank you. Ali, how do you? I mean, you're sitting in a different place. You're not in a commercial organization, but you're still in a powerful body. What do you see as? Do you think my basic supposition we're not moving fast enough is correct? And if that's the case, then why?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm not over the data on whether we're moving quite fast enough, but I would agree entirely with Ludvig. From my perception and from the perception of those in the sector, we're definitely not moving fast enough. It's, one step forward, one step back on a fairly regular basis. In terms of why, I mean, from a behavioural and a citizen perspective, I think we see that people think, certainly in the global north and in London and Western Europe, that it all feels very far away, both in time and in space, that the climate crisis is something that you see occasionally on the news. There's occasionally a sense we get from people when we talk to them that if it was really a serious problem, as serious as you're making out, then surely the government would intervene more radically, faster. So this sense that it's someone else's responsibility to do things. I have Gen Z aged children, adults actually, but they regularly challenge me and say, look, it's not my job to change, it's the businesses and the government's job to change. And there's a sense of, I would like to see more of an understanding of it as a whole system, but you can't ask that of citizens. It's a lot to ask of them. It's like what we see in the sector and in the space, but it's very difficult sometimes to see yourself as part of a really big whole like that. And I think individuals they feel powerless, but they also feel like they shouldn't have to do it because someone else should be doing it who's got more power than them.
Yes. This is what I call the who moves first problem. I mean, you've really encapsulated it. And I'm not going to ask you the question who moves first, because it's easy for somebody to say in government to say, and I'm not saying you would at all, Ali, but it should be companies, or for somebody in a commercial organization to say, well, government needs to do it. And that's a lot of the roundabout we're on. But I think there are other roundabouts as well. China ought to do it first, or America, and I think that's a problem. And then the other one I've seen close up is industries saying, well, yes, so we know that airlines are responsible for a certain percentage of emissions, but actually farming should move first because they're responsible for a much bigger proportion of emissions, which I think is factually true. And so you have this whole who moves first dynamic that you just outlined, which I think is a real problem.
Yeah, and I think I've seen a meme recently on social media where someone shows a picture of some kind of funny thing that AI has done and gone, we'll be really pleased that we prioritize this when our fields are flooded and our forests are on fire. So I think that there's also a whole question about people being that whole, it's a very long way away. People prioritizing what's now, what's immediate. And there's a whole bunch of sort of behavioral and anthropological reasons for that and why we do that. But it's very difficult for citizens, for individuals to really be able to do that projection and understand what their role in the whole system is. So I wouldn't put, responsibility on any one group. I do see it as a system.
Well, let's talk a little bit more then about what we do about that. And I'm going to flick now back to the research and begin to reference that directly. So Ludvig, a question to start with you is what did the research make you think? Did you broadly agree with the conclusions, or do you see other angles that we're missing, which are very important?
No, I think like the videos really materialize the life at home that we're looking at, like the many peoples and the struggles they have to act. Then I think research, and I think it captured some really interesting insight, which I took note of. The relevancy gap. I think it's like I think everyone agrees everyone aspires to live a sustainable life. What that entails, not many people know. And I think the thing that really got me thinking is we have this, you refer to it, I think, as part of this session, the say-do gap. what I find a lot is also that it needs to be something around the impact to kind of get people on board to what are the actions they take in the everyday that could really drive a behavior on a global scale, but also on a local scale. And I think that's, for me, super interesting. And if some of those actions we've seen really has a win-win. When it's a win becoming not only affordable and sustainable, but it has an impact. And it also is something that's saving you in the end. If it's on the LED bulb that you buy, that you have, that's kind of has a longer lifetime and so forth. But I think there's a couple of these win-win-win situations that'd be super interesting to look at your research and combine it with ours and others to see when we're adding perspectives to it. So I think, but the impact part, I think, could be super interesting to get closer to what the science is telling us we need to focus on.
Yes. Okay, good. Ali, what about you? How did it relate to what you've seen, from a local authority, governmental, in one of the world's biggest cities?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously been a bit of global research, and we're very localized and very kind of geographically focused in the work that we do. But we're all human, and I think that the segmentation that Ollie talked about does talk about some really core things about what it is to be human, what those different types are. Interestingly, I think I'm a combination of two of them. So
which ones?
Well, I'm deeply cynical, but really committed to living sustainably. So
right.
I've got this weird kind of mishmash. So but yeah, I think as a broad template, I think it's really useful and in helping people think more about what it means to be human and on a day-to-day basis. I think for us, what we like to add into that story is kind of that hyper-localized element. So, there are things London is this massively diverse city full of people from all over the world with different cultures, different lifestyles, different languages, different faiths. I mean, it's an incredibly complicated and exciting place to live for that reason. So I think for us, we take that as an impetus to look at the humanity of it all, and then we need to drill down so we work right at a very local level as well as at a sort of a borough level and at a citywide level. And one of the things we've started working on recently over the past couple of years is circular neighbourhoods, which are built around high streets.
Right.
So there's 600 of those across London, and each one of those is really, really different. So what's interesting for us is to apply the lenses that have come out of your research and look through those at a local community and see if that resonates and where it does and doesn't, and how it needs to be kind of tweaked to make that.
I've got a follow-up question for you in just a moment. Before I go there, can we have the Slido up, Ayushi, for the audience to share any questions to our panelists? Thank you. While we're doing that, Ali, straight back at you on it. So if I live in one of those 600 areas, how would I then know that? So this is a QR code, everyone, if you want to go into Slido and ask us direct questions, which we'll be happy to take. Ali, how would I know if I'm in one of those 600 areas that it is an area, that there is something going on? What might, I'm trying to get to the very granular level here. What might get me across the say-do gap?
Yeah, so we're early days with this. We've run one or two projects so far. We're doing one specifically on food at the moment in a very small neighbourhood in Islington called the Cali or Caledonian Road. But we concluded one a little while ago in an area of Hounslow called Heston. And we did quite an extensive communications campaign around it, kind of at a very local level. But the thing that we're trying to do in those neighbourhoods is not educate and preach to people so that they therefore go and find these solutions. We're trying to change the choice architecture at a local level.
What does that mean?
So basically, we want to provide more circular or sustainable options for people.
Right.
So work with community groups to set up food growing, work with schools to set up clothes swaps or little refill shops in the school, of which there were quite a few that happened during that particular project. Work with businesses who are offering, waste reduction or sharing capabilities or rental capabilities to do more in the neighbourhood, to promote more to local residents. setting up more sort of second-hand facilities, a whole range of different things that basically so that it becomes easy. Like you don't go, oh, I live in a circular neighborhood. You just go, oh, did you see that second-hand place that's just opened up on the high street?
Yes.
Or you
Yes.
see, oh, look, I've just seen a swap shops going on in the college up the road, etc. So it's more about making those options available to people easy and by default in a local neighborhood. And Ollie, you talked about how difficult it is to get to making sustainability a default. Of course it is on a global scale, but on a neighborhood scale, it's still difficult. Don't get me wrong. We worked really hard on that project. There was a lot of effort that went into it. But it is easier to do it because you can identify a whole plethora of partners and organisations that you can work with to do it. And together, in that very focused area, you can start making that a reality.
Excellent. I love the term choice architecture. Now you've explained it to me. Thank you. And Ludvig, I'm going to ask you the same question. I'm going to ask you about that because IKEA is both a global and a local thing. I mean, it's incredibly global. You might be global brands I can think of, but then I know where my local IKEA is, and it's a specifically local thing. So, how are you creating choice architecture at that local level?
It's a very good question. I think we, as a global range, as we are deploying it in IKEA retail, which should represent more than 30 markets on us and a lot of different, in London, among other places we exist. I think it is, the range has always been a range, it's different groups of designs and other things, which is not my area of expertise, but I think how to choose it. IKEA normally comes into play a big role for people when you have certain moment in life, when you're moving out of your home, when you're creating a family, when you're, for any reason, have to do the big moves in your life stages. We can relate to them. So I think our architecture has a lot to be built. The range has a lot to be built around just that. When those moments happens in life, and then we're orchestrating, like how do you redo your? At this point, we're focusing a lot about sleep, but how important is around sleep, and then it could move on. And I think that's our architecture has much been with that. Then I think the range we have and what we provide has different dimensions, which then of course have sustainability or circularity connected to it, where it needs to be incorporated in. So it's a win-win. And I think that's where we have certain product which resonate in a local context much better, because it's, as you say, how is the electricity bills looking in different parts of the world from how people are living at this moment? Then we could probably go stronger in certain market on certain products and solutions for homes, which will make people's lives better in the end. And we found a lot of I think positive response when we are able to communicate not only the product, how it's made, but also what kind of outcome it has. It will save you money on your electricity bill, for example.
Right. So what I think I heard from you was, that last bit, which was very in line with what the research is saying, which is, what are the entryways? It strikes me that what you just said is a classic example of resourcefulness. I can save money on this. Oh, and it's good for the planet. So then you're going to get a double win. But I also think I heard you, I know because we've worked together, that you've been focused on sleep as an issue. That sounds like you're not trying to do everything, but you're trying to zero in on certain things where you can have, by focusing for a period of time, you can have the maximum effect. Is that the strategy?
Yeah, it's part of the legacy or the values we have, that when we see something that we need to come together, we call it kraftsamla, which is a Swedish word where we join forces and we put a focus towards something, which we mobilize everything in our supply chain towards a certain topic, a certain challenge, and it's always rooted in people's everyday life. So if it is about sleep, how do we enable better sleep for the many people? It's not only about one thing in your life, because we need to understand the full width of the life. Similar to your videos there, that we do so-called home visits, and you kind of say, what are your pain points in home? And then we understand around the bedroom, about sleep, these are things. Might not have to be the thing about your bed. It could be about, I have small children and I have to share room. It's small space living. This is my reality. Or I live in London. It's it's a lot of noise in here and so forth. So I think we're trying to, these are the times we can really do research and understand things that we can make easier for people, and we communicate it in a way that people gets it in the end. That's the intention, at least. but kraftsamla is the word we use when we get, and we do that every year, all the time.
I love the way Swedes have words for things like that. It's great. It's not the first time I've heard that. Fika as well, for example, the coffee break, and yeah. More seriously though, you just touched on something which relates to a question we've had through on Slido. Thank you for whoever sent the question. But how can we get people to think in terms of collective action rather than just individual action? Maybe Ali, I'm going to bounce back to you on that. But Ludvig, you just talked a little bit about you get your whole supply chain and organization to look at something which is collective. That's important. Ali, what about collective action rather than individual? How can we get more of that?
It's a really interesting question, because I'm not sure if, I don't know what Ollie thinks, but I'm not convinced everyone wants to or will want to join in with collective action. Some people do, and that's the kind of action that they gravitate towards, whereas others just want to be left alone and get on with things in private and not as an individual. We do some things at ReLondon. We've just finished our 5th annual repair week in London, which has doubled in size every year since we started it. And there's at its core, there is a repair network in there who want to feel part of a bigger thing when we do it. And creating those moments during the year and those platforms are really helpful. I think giving people an opportunity to join in and do things as part of a collective can be great. And interestingly, another point on that is that we found over the past year or two, we've really been observing anecdotally at the events and activations that we organise that a lot of younger Londoners are coming along not because they're there to be sustainable or to do the actual thing that is happening at the event, but they're there to meet people.
Oh, interesting.
And that's been a real insight that we've started actively pursuing as an entryway for a lot of people. So that is about collectivity, but in a different way. So we've just recently run a series of events with an organisation called London Lonely Girls Club, which is specifically designed and set up to do that. So this is where we collectively act, is that we hook up with organisations like them and a whole host of others to create these networks of action in London. But Ollie, I don't know what you think about the individual versus collective thing from your archetypes.
Yeah, Ollie, go for it.
Two immediate thoughts. One is that it's essential to be thinking both about systems change or collective change, organizational change, infrastructure change, supply change, as well as individualistic change, because the two are always in dialogue with each other. And I think what's been happening probably too much in the last 5 or 10 years is that too much emphasis has been placed on individuals, changing individuals and their choices and the onus being on them, and not enough focus on how does one provide the foundations or the catalyst for the other. What's the interaction between them? And I think both in what you've been talking about, Ali, and Ludvig, we've heard that the best solutions really think about that interrelationship. The second thing I'd say is based on your immediate response, Ali, where you said, well, that's an interesting question, because one of the things we looked at was the distinction between collective and individualized senses of responsibility around the world. And they are hugely different, country to country, region to region. And that's really important, because if you think about sustainability as a transformation of behaviors, yes, but also values and beliefs, how you frame that responsibility is absolutely essential, because in one part of the world, doubling down on the idea that we're all in this together and we can only solve it together would be alienating. Vice versa, focusing on the fact that as individuals, we can change so much, the power is in our hands, can either deeply appeal to people or actually alienate people. So the sense with which people sit on that spectrum of individualized versus collective responsibility is absolutely essential. And final little plug, I think the example you gave, Ali, is central to the belonging entryway, where if you talk about being part of something, feeling like you are contributing to the momentum of something in and of itself can be an entryway to sustainability.
That's great, Ollie. I've got another question for all three of you, and you're allowed to kick the question and disassemble it if you want, because it's a difficult one. And I also I'm going to try and wrap at the end. I've got an answer to this too. What's the most important action? This has come through on Slido, so thank you whoever sent it. what's the most important action businesses, policymakers, and consumer advocates should take to help consumers live lives or live sustainably? So Ludvig, you first.
I think for me, the action, some of the work we look at, it's the action is, it is, in short, it is for businesses and people, I think, we're all individuals in the end, is to show that it's a good business to be a good business. And I think the way that really translates for me is that like IKEA has kind of reduced their CO2 whilst growing their footprint since 2060. I think the reduction is around 30%. But it's, in short, it says that the people you will trust today and tomorrow will be the one that takes the real action towards something better, and also be not silent about it, to speak about it. And I think then I relate back as an individual in my family, like when you see your children taking a stand for something which is very passionate about the biodiversity or climate change, something, those are the actions that we need. We need to start speaking up, I think, about the good things we're doing and showing it to the world. And that will be part of closing the gap of, which I remember telling you before, like the doom and gloom in the narrative. We need to start talking about the good things that we do, because there is a lot of success in how we're deploying viable, sustainable business models. There's a lot of success in how renewable has become cheaper than fossil fuel energy and so forth. So these are both on a business viability cases, and IKEA is part of trying to prove their part in it. And then a lot of other great companies are doing their part. And then I think that's the same for individuals, that you can't tell people how to live as a peer-to-peer, as I can't tell my partner how to live her life, but she can inspire me to live a better life. And I think that relationship is much stronger for me, the fear of missing out, because in the end, it doesn't only help me maybe today of my well-being to become more of become vegetarian or cycle before taking the car and so forth. It will also help the future generation looking at. So I think there are these win-wins that we need to show and speak up. So I think for us as a corporate, it's really to show that it's a good business to be a good.
Yeah, that's very, very clear from what you're saying, that it's good business. And I also particularly picked up on your suggestion that building trust long term is very important for businesses. Look, this is what we've been doing consistently. I think sooner or later that will matter. I'm a little skeptical over how much it matters right now. I wish it mattered more, but I think it is. The question, are you still?
No, I'm very clear on the question. I'm just not sure on the answer.
Yeah, it is a hard question.
It's a really hard question. The one action I think is, yeah, there's a million actions, but I think there is a principle which I think is important. I agree, Ludvig, with your analysis, which feels to me about storytelling, about positive storytelling, showing what the positive future might look like, rather than always being, terrifying and making people so scared that they just go shopping or put their head in a bucket, rather than do anything. And I recognize that, but I think for me it's great to tell that story and to show what's possible, but you have to make it easy. So accessibility and ease for me is a really important thing, and I think that that's a whole combination of different factors at play. If we're all thinking about how do we make it easier and more normal and more of a default for everyone to live this way, for businesses to run their businesses this way, for and for governments to implement policy levers and mechanisms that aren't problematic but that are rather helpful, help people achieve a more sustainable lifestyle, then I think that focus on ease and accessibility is really, really vital for me. And there's a million actions that go with that, but it's the principle of it, I think.
Super clear. Ollie, I've got one more to add in, but if you've got a brief, succinct answer to this. Ali, that was great, by the way. Thank you.
I think large organizations and governments have to be willing to experiment more than they have been, working at it in a experimental, playful way, knowing that they might try 10 things, 9 won't work, but the one that will make a massive difference. And I think it relates to something else, which is playing more with and experimenting more with who they can partner with, whose actions they can amplify, accelerate. There are so many wonderful things happening in the world, and companies and organizations and governments need to get behind that, as opposed to thinking that they themselves have got to start from scratch.
I like that a lot, Ollie. And it's good. So I've heard three. I'm going to add one, but I've heard three things. One, show it's good for business. Second, develop as much accessibility and ease as possible so it heads towards default. And thirdly, experiment, which I also translate as innovation in my head as well, Ollie. But I'm going to add one more to that, which I think is very important, which is metrics. Setting metrics and targets, I think, actually matters a lot. And although those targets are reversible, as sadly we've seen in some cases recently, I think if you set metrics at the organizational level, whether it's government or, I think what the UK government did mandating 2030, I know that slipped, but mandating 2030 as being the date at which no more internal combustion engine cars could be sold privately. I think that was actually a very bold move, and it did kickstart a lot of action in the automotive industry. They woke up and thought, oh my God, we're going to have to do something about that. And although the target slipped, which is regrettable, it still made action happen. So those are four things. I think that's quite a rich set of answers, actually, to the question, what's the one thing? So it's four things. Ludvig, Ali, Ollie, thank you so much for being here today and talking about this so well and so fluidly. I'm going to hand back to Ayushi. Ayushi, thank you for setting this up.
Thank you so much, Mark. Sincere thanks from Consumers International to each one of you for joining us on the call today, and to all the attendees, thank you so much for joining us on the first day of the summit. We look forward to having all of you again tomorrow and the entire week. We start off at 9 a.m. UTC tomorrow with our regional dialogues, more specific to the region of Asia, where we will be talking about, what are the key consumer actions and activities we are all looking into to promote sustainable living. So looking forward to having you all there. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.